This time, we go back to the future with Back to the Future Part 2. And along the way, we ask, how can the exact same movie work twice in a series? What happened to Marty's watch? And did this film make any correct predictions for 2015? We're precisely on schedule on this edition of Force-Fed Sci-Fi. Hello, everybody, and welcome back to the Force-Fed Sci-Fi podcast. I am one of your hosts, Chris Rupp, and I am joined by my friend and co-host,
the Sean Michael Culp.
Booyah!
Boo!
Talking about Back to the Future Part 2, our first sequel, really, I think, on the Force-Fed Sci-Fi podcast.
Yeah, our first. Yeah. Well, I don't think we've had any, no? I mean, we did the Star Wars. But that was kind of like a sweet. Same thing with the Terminator.
Right. This is our first, I would say, true sequel that we've discussed on the show. We have our list structured in a way, if we are covering series, that we will cover the series in sequential order. Mm-hmm. With doing Back to the Future in the early days of the podcast and now returning to the franchise almost a year later is almost appropriate timing.
It is almost, actually, because this is around the time when we started recording episodes.
Right.
So now we know. Throughout the year, folks, what's coming up is probably episode 2.
We'll see.
Get ready to be bored.
All right, so quick breakdown of Back to the Future Part 2. So immediately following the events of the first film, Doc Brown arrives back in 1985 to take Marty and Jennifer to 2015 and intervene, in the future of their children and inadvertently change events in their past. So now they must travel back to the events of the first film and fix the future.
Ooh.
There's a lot of back and forth with the timeline here. Kind of amps up the time travel aspect of the film to 11. Yes. In my opinion.
They definitely focus on it a lot more than in the first one, which is just, get me home. Try not to bang my mom. Get me home.
Yeah, there's no concern about the 1.21 gigawatts this time around.
Not at all. Which I think, he had to add something, a little slice.
Yeah, but now it's just Doc looking like a freak picking through people's trash.
Yes, and the whole time he's just spouting out stats. The world is going to end. It's a paradox that will cause the entire chaos of the world shred apart. Or they'll just pass out.
Right. All right, so breaking down the cast and crew of Back to the Future Part 2, it's largely the same cast and crew from the first film, directed by Robert Zemeckis, who returned to direct this film, this series, and the next entry, Part 3. He also worked on Who Framed Roger Rabbit in the year prior to making this film.
Yes, he was hectic. He did this film, and then he did back-to-back, Back to the Future 2 and 3. So this man was a busy bee.
He was really starting to become the director we know him to be now.
Oh, yeah.
Because prior to Back to the Future, he did Romancing the Stone, and then Back to the Future, and now Who Framed Roger Rabbit, which if you haven't seen that one, I would call that the non-sci-fi recommendation of the week.
Oh, we haven't had one in a while.
Yeah, it's such a fun movie to watch because you see all these great cartoon characters running around. I mean, it's still horrible to watch Christopher Lloyd dip a cartoon shoe in a vat of acid, though.
Oh, yeah, because Robert Zemeckis loves Christopher Lloyd.
He does. Also returning in the series, we have Michael J. Fox as Marty McFly, which you can't recast someone as Marty McFly now.
Oh, that would be crazy. He's also Marty McFly Jr. and Marlene McFly.
Right, so he's pulling triple duty in this film. Oh, yeah. But he had a lot of films to do in between the first film and this one. He did Teen Wolf, which was super popular in the mid-'80s. And then he did the super serious Oliver Stone ripoff Vietnam War film, Casualties of War.
Yeah.
Which is, it is not a great movie.
You didn't like it?
It is so emotionally heavy. There is absolutely no... I mean, say what you will about Oliver Stone and some of his movies, but at least there was some moments of levity and times you could breathe in those films. But Casualties of War is just, you do not feel good at the end of that film.
Oh, it's really depressing. I saw that 10 years ago, and I do have to say, Michael J. Fox does seem a little out of place in it because he's so short, and just seeing him in Teen Wolf and all these films, you're like, why are you in this heavy film? But kudos to him for trying to expand his craft, and
Right.
do something.
But his oeuvre is quirky comedies. It's not ultra serious films. I mean, I think he's somebody who figured out what his style is
early on.
Right.
We also have the return of Christopher Lloyd as Doc
Yes.
Brown, which I don't think you could recast that at all.
No, it's great when you have two characters in a series like this that are inextricably tied together forever. It's Harrison Ford and Sean Connery in the Indiana Jones series. Also, we have a couple of recasts for this film. Elizabeth Shue took over from Claudia Wells as Jennifer Parker, but Elizabeth Shue was no slouch to 80s movies. She appeared in The Karate Kid, Cocktail, Adventures in Babysitting. However, she does spend most of this film and the next film unconscious.
Yeah. So take that for what you will.
Also, in the recast department, we have Jeffrey Weissman took over as George McFly from Crispin Glover.
Yes. So Crispin Glover,
also known as the weirdest man in Hollywood.
So I know he got replaced. So there's always, I know he was on a podcast. He's on YouTube. He's talked about this in interviews over the course of probably 30 years about why he chose to, I guess, not reappear in this. But the big thing that he said was the money. They only offered him $125,000, which is incredible. Which was, he said, less than half of what their salaries were. And then philosophical differences. He didn't like how, apparently in his mind, the whole point of this trilogy is Marty getting a truck. And he thought it should have been about love.
Crispin Glover's whole career can be summed up by the fact that he doesn't know what movie he's in. I think he totally missed the point of Back to the Future. It's nothing more than an escapist sci-fi comedy romp.
Yeah.
And to glean any meaningful message from that is just, okay, you're down in the mud with the pigs looking for truffles there. Like you got to tone down on your critical analysis there, son.
Like, I get it. I get what he means by, like, he felt the story rewarded characters with financial gain, kind of, with the truck. But, like, in this film, Marty tries to get financial gain and Doc turns him down, and it ends up being the paradox, the crisis in the film, which causes all the conflict. And then when Marty tries to get money with needles, he ends up losing his job. So to me, it's kind of like, okay, where's this financial gain? I mean, yeah, he gets his truck, but it kind of blows my mind a little bit.
Bottom line, Crispin Glover wanted Marlon Brando money at a time where he wasn't going to be and never will be Marlon Brando. So, yeah. Take that.
Oh, man. He is an author, though. But they did recast him with Jeffrey Weissman, who they obscured him and kind of like took George McFly out of the plot. So like that's why he's upside down. And they actually put like a false chin, nose, cheekbones, and he kind of sounds, it's kind of like if you don't focus too hard on the character, it seems like Crispin Glover.
Right. It's like gleaming over the fact that Marty's kids are played by Michael J. Fox.
Yes. But the whole
They
point,
got all of Dad's genes.
though, with that being said, the studio using his likeness, like Robert Zemeckis, caused a big lawsuit with Crispin Glover, and he sued the producers of the film on the grounds that they neither owned his likeness nor could use it without his consent. So the Screen Actors Guild Award changed their collective bargaining. So now for the future, like actors now, you have to sign a contract and you get royalties and all that. So it is a good positive thing. Like taking the power away from the producers. It's just
the fact that Crispin Glover is now tied with that contract clause is weird.
Right.
Because there's still the video of him almost kicking David Letterman in the head. Like, really? He ushered this change in Hollywood?
It's kind of mind-boggling when you think about it. He's just such a conglomerate of confusion. But enough about Crispin Glover.
We also have Leah Thompson returning to play Lorraine. Thomas F. Wilson returned to play Biff. James Tolkien also returned to play Mr. Strickland briefly in the film. So, for the most part, the same cast and crew returned. So, awesome. Always good when you can have that consistency in a series.
Mm-hmm.
So, they kind of ramped up the production on this 10 times compared to the first film. Budgeted at $40 million. Zemeckis and the screenwriter Bob Gale were hesitant about making a sequel.
Yeah, they didn't want to at the beginning. And it kind of shows, and we'll get into it with the plot, with like the ending. But apparently due to this massive success, they're like, all right, we have to. There's no going back on this.
Well, right. And Bob Gale has now since expressed regret for how he ended the first film with Marty and Jennifer flying off with Doc, because it forced them to continue on that journey from the first film.
But that does, I do think, and we'll get into our, I guess, criticism, with sequels, how they go, I think you do have two ways of doing it. You can either pick up where you left off, or you can retcon like Star Wars. Now, what you do when you pick up where you left off, you could do like a Rian Johnson, where you still pick up but you retcon, or you could, do like this film, kind of do callbacks but form your own film in a way without being too self-referential, trying to find that middle ground.
I just wish that they would have taken like a bigger step creative-wise with Back to the Future Part 2.
I agree.
The original draft of the film had it set in 1967.
Oh, yeah.
So it could have been very interesting to explore that time period when the 60s, free love, man, was still in full swing.
Right.
The Manson family hadn't murdered a whole bunch of people yet.
Yeah, seeing Michael J. Fox get tempted with like weed and all that. Doc Brown. Oh,
it could have been a lot of interesting story choices there, but they, I don't want to say they played it safe. I think they just went back to a formula that really worked for them.
Yeah.
But the biggest challenge from what I can gather was recreating Hill Valley 2015.
And that took 2 years of set building. 2 years. And if you look at it when the film's going on, it's incredible.
It's one of the most impressive sets I've seen outside of a James Bond film.
Yes, I'll agree with you there. It's nuts. Like, they recreate everything. And it looks immaculate. The clock tower, the pond, all the shops.
That whole garden there, the shops, even the cars that come floating down, it's still amazing. Although Rick Carter, the production designer, kind of didn't have a whole lot to work with in terms of directions.
Oh, yeah.
But he also worked on Blade Runner, so he had the challenge of creating something that was almost an anti-Blade Runner.
Yes, I read up on that he did not. Well, Zemeckis didn't want to go the dystopian, future, like, Space Odyssey, 2001, Blade Runner, because it's just been done so many times. And I think, and we'll talk about how, the future and everything, the tech, but I think their humorous look at the future, like, whatever, let's just make this crazy and big, ended up working.
They lean hard into the ridiculous aspect of anything that could happen in the future, even down to the wardrobe of wearing your pants inside out, the power laces, the I guess, what would you call that hat that Marty Jr. is wearing? Is that a mood hat? Or
I guess.
Is that one of those hats that changes colors when you move?
Did you see the hats the kids were wearing? They were wearing pans on their head. Literal pans.
Oh,
like
I must have missed that.
Dude, it's real quick, but like how you wash your noodles and drain it.
They're wearing colanders on their heads?
Swear to God. That's why I'm like, wait, this kid's talking crap about their shooting.
Elijah Wood is getting royalties for wearing a freaking colander on his head.
Oh, that's right. Elijah Wood's in here. Use that kid.
Right. Well, even the special effects were incredibly advanced for the time. The aging makeup techniques, those were kept on the super down low. And it's also one of the first films to incorporate digital composite shots where the two shots are combined to form one image on the screen with the old version and of the actor and the young version. We'll get to those later, though, because it is worth diving into a bit deeper.
Absolutely.
So let's talk about the film. Let's really dig into the meat and potatoes here. So we were talking a bit off air, and we had I don't want to call it a disagreement, because I think let's call it a polite disagreement.
A polite disagreement. There we go. There's
in
no
regards
shouting.
In regards to how the structure is for the film.
Yeah.
So what did you think about how part 2 is laid out for our viewing pleasure?
So, it picks up right where it's left off, and then they take them to the future. And it's kind of devised basically into 3 parts. The future, 1985, and 1955. Now, my issues with the future, while it does look incredible, the sets, the tech, it's so out of this world and ridiculous, I felt like the film didn't start cooking until till Biff takes the magazine back, and then they realize the conflict in 1985. Because in 2015, it had a lot of callbacks to the original film. Like, when you get there, Marty confronts Griff, or Biff, at the bar. Then he pisses him off and is chased around town. And then Griff falls into the clock tower and gets, like how Biff in the original hits the manure truck. So they have those similarities. Marty, he gets knocked out in 1985 and then wakes up next to his mom taking care of him. In the original one, after his mom takes care of him, he witnesses his family. Jennifer's knocked out. She goes, sees her family. There's just a lot of, things that they recycled. And to me, I felt like the future, it was just so recycled. The only point of them going to the future was for him to get the magazine, talk about it, paradox, and then for Biff to take it back in time, to establish the conflict in the film. It was cool seeing their family and seeing that, the conflict and how their lives are changing, yada, yada. But to me, it just felt so recycled. And like I was watching, kind of like how Hangover 2 is the same film with the same plot, just in a different location. That's how the first third of the film felt. Enjoyable. They did a really good job, and he picked the best scenes from the first to do. So if you're going to do a sequel with those scenes, I'm glad he picked it. But, sometimes when you play the same hand twice, you don't win. So that's kind of my disagreement.
Again, this is where we politely disagree. I think the first act of the film, where they are in 2015, and we do see the impressive set piece of the future Hill Valley, and just the sheer ridiculousness of the future is so entertaining to watch. And to me, this is where I feel like the film really treads new ground for it being a sequel. This is something I feel all sequels should do. They have to tread new ground. They have to expand their universe. And this is doing it for me right here, setting the film in 2015. This is where the film should have been set for the entirety. It should have, and Marty buying the sports almanac and Doc telling him, I didn't build the time machine to get rich. And it really kind of admonishing him for his choices, and it really plays into the whole father-son relationship that they have in a way.
Yeah.
It's hard to imagine Marty and Doc as peers, A, because of the age difference, and B, because they have such wildly different opinions about what the time machine can be used for. And it's clear when Marty buys that sports almanac of what he really wants to use time travel for. And that's where the film should have been at home. And then we see what Marty and Jennifer are like further down in this timeline. They're not happy. Their house is, I don't want to say in shambles. It still looks like a nice house by 2015 standards, but they live in a crappy neighborhood. There's graffiti, there's gunshots, sirens all over the place. Marty Jr. seems like a bit of a screw up. Marlene clearly has been home all day, doesn't have a job or anything like that. Jennifer has gotten old and fat. Marty's in a job he doesn't like. So clearly things are not going super well in 2015. And I really felt like that could have been something interesting that was explored in this film. But they chose not to. They went back to Biff's 1985, where he rules everything because he got the sports almanac and Lorraine has big boobs. And then they have to go back to 1955 and pretty much explore the entirety of the first film in a condensed version. They spend half of the second act and the final third act basically going through the final 2/3 of Back to the Future Part 1.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, they had an opportunity to do something really interesting with the story and played it safe by going back to the first film. Literally going back to the first film.
That's what I mean. They played it safe in so many areas in the film where it's just like, you tread new ground in little areas, like 1985 Biff's is really cool where they're fleshing out the hotel and everything, what it looks like, but it's not enough.
It should have been called Biff to the Future.
Yeah.
Because the most interesting part of Marty going back to Biff 1985 is how corrupt and powerful and scary Biff has become, and how he has everyone under his thumb.
Yeah.
How he claims to love Lorraine and yet is doing everything he can to just keep her family under his thumb.
Yeah.
He's so willing to cut off her daughter, to let her eldest son go back to jail, and to send Marty back to boarding school and put her out on the street.
Yeah.
It's horrible to watch Lorraine just capitulate to his demands and his power.
Well, like he said, you will be my wife.
Yeah. Ladies, if anybody runs down the street at you yelling, "You will be my wife," they are not good husband material.
Oh my!
That is a PSA courtesy of Force Fed Sci-Fi.
Well, even old Biff says, "You always had a way with women, didn't you?"
Yeah,
he's like, "You idiot."
Old Biff is laying some knowledge down on young Biff. Like, hey, don't treat women like you do. Listen and don't be a jackass. And then 30 years later, guess what he's doing?
Same thing.
He literally did not listen to his better self.
His better self, yes. The nicer Biff. That's still kind of a prick, but Biff nonetheless.
And we don't even have most of the interesting characters during this portion of the film. Like we said, Jennifer spends pretty much the entirety of the film unconscious.
Well, yeah.
Doc becomes this Obi-Wan Kenobi character where he's able to give Marty insight into the past and the future by exploring what happens in Biff's timeline.
Yes.
And Marty is just this clueless wanderer in Biff 1985.
Well, it's like when Marty went back in the first one, he felt kind of like a high school kid that was 18, but this one he doesn't really feel like he's 18. Maybe that's because
no, I think it's the passage of time from when the films came out. Michael J. Fox is older.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, granted, he's still doing teen comedies and the occasional weird super serious war film, but he's still very much pictured as a young kid.
Mm-hmm. But doesn't act too much like one.
No,
except for the gambling. But the Jennifer thing, to me, I feel like that was just, not only was it kind of, I guess, a lens flare, but it was also I feel like the writers didn't know what to do with her. Like that you really felt where Robert was like, oh, crap. Why do we have that scene at the end of the first one? Well, now we got to do something with her. Let's just knock her out,
It would have been one thing if they expanded her role in the next film, but she spends the entirety of that film unconscious as well. While Marty's messing around in the Old West, she's still laying on her front porch unconscious.
And that's what I mean.
And then Marty shows up in the last 10 minutes, kisses her on the forehead, and like, oh, I'm awake now.
Yeah.
My prince.
Right? I mean, in the first one, it made sense.
Back to the Future, Sleeping Beauty style.
Yes. She wasn't awake in the first one because he was back in time.
Right. It doesn't make sense for that character to be there.
But when they come back together at the end, it's cute because it's like, oh, he missed her. But in this, it's just like, okay, it's been 2 films, passage of time. What? So that was kind of an issue for me a little bit.
If I had to pick a lens flare, my whole thing, we know how the first film ended and how it transitions into the second film with Doc showing up going, no, you and Jennifer turned out all right. It's your kids. Something's got to be done about your kids. And then we see how crappy their marriage is and how messed up their life is. You mean to tell me that that's all right by your standards?
Doc, yeah.
As far as I can tell, Doc has never had a serious romantic relationship, so he just does not have a clue about what is all right in a marriage.
Well, I guess
you mean to tell me that that's all right?
Well,
and yet interfering with the lives of our children is okay?
Right? Well, his barometer, all he's had is Heine. He doesn't know until the third one what it's like to woo a woman.
Right.
So
he's like 60 years, I found love. Right. I had to travel 100 years in the past to find the love of my life. God knows what would have happened if I didn't have this time machine.
That is hilarious. Also, I would say maybe for a second the guy in 1955 was like, "Are you Marty McFly? I got something for you." And then he's like really nice. I'm like, what? Why are you?
Yeah, he's the Western Union guy.
Why are you? Oh, is that how Western Union people are? They
I don't know.
At first, and then they're.
Nobody's had to send a telegraph since telephones became widely available.
Was that how it was? They hand delivered them?
Yeah.
Oh, no way.
Yeah, you'd have a telegraph office. I mean, yeah, because if you watch Deadwood, you'd actually know this. Before, everybody just sent letters that were hand delivered, and then the telegraph came, and you could actually send messages over the wire. And so you had the person receiving the messages in the telegraph office, and then you had a runner that would hand deliver those messages to people. So you'd know this if you watched Deadwood. It didn't make stupid jokes about it.
But the wood
Don't say it! For the love of God, do not say it.
So speaking of Deadwood, how about product placements in this film?
So much. Oh my God. And it's big time when we see it when Marty goes back in time, obviously.
Well, that was a correct prediction of the future, except for Texaco. Is Texaco around?
I don't even know. I mean, I think maybe a bigger one would have been maybe Exxon or Mobil. Or even Chevron would have made sense. I don't even know. I don't know where Texaco is.
There are 2 in the state of Illinois. So
oh wow,
they gambled wrong.
So just like how the one Waffle House in Illinois is like 400 miles south from where we are.
That's Texaco for you, baby.
Yeah,
northern, southern.
Yeah, because if you don't live in Illinois, once you get past Springfield, it is the South.
Yes.
Just watch Stevie.
I would say once you get past Peoria, it's the South.
Oh, that too.
Good God. Hey, where'd this accent come from?
We call it the cotton corn line.
Those hicks. So, yes, there's Pepsi. He literally orders a Pepsi and says Pepsi. And what else?
Well, even the first film was an ad for Pepsi because he tries ordering a Pepsi free, and then
that's another thing.
And then he gets a tab. So, I mean, product placement isn't anything new to this series.
The Nikes. Oh, yeah. AT&T.
Yeah, but those power laces were awesome, though.
They were awesome. Everyone wants them.
And we did not see a brand for the form-fitting jacket, which, again, so cool.
Yes. It fits your size, and it dries you.
Right.
That's amazing.
Imagine what else it can do. Like, if it charged my phone, like, done, I'm buying this jacket. It sounds amazing, and we don't have it.
No.
Clothing companies, what are you doing? Get on that. Nike's already working on a way for power laces. I think there's a company out there that's going to work on this type of jacket.
They do have jackets with speakers in them, though.
But I don't want that, though.
No, you don't want
I don't want that.
I want to charge my phone.
I have a nice enough car where I don't have to worry about speakers or, like, what's wrong with headphones?
Right.
Maybe there's people on the street who don't want to hear what else I listen to.
It's true.
They don't want to hear my conspiracy theory podcasts.
9/11 was an inside job. What did you say, young man?
Exactly. I don't need strange looks coming my way. Like, did your jacket just say something?
Why is your jacket swearing at me? What's going on? What else?
But it's amazing how prescient that this future displayed really is, because we see technology all over the place. We see video chat screens, fingerprint scanners, news drones. There are screens everywhere in this 2015.
It was a perfect prediction. Yeah, for most things.
For most of the things. I mean, I did love the 3D hologram billboards, whatever. Those were cool.
The jaws coming down.
It was funny how...
This still looks fake.
I knew it was fake. Well, it wasn't the only thing that was self-referential. You noticed something in the curio shop window, right?
When they're zooming in on the sports almanac, if you pause it, because I noticed it real quickly, Robert Zemeckis was directing the Who Framed Roger Rabbits, and there is a Roger Rabbit plush doll right next to the almanac, and it's kind of quick unless you pause it. But so he was self-referencing his own film that may have just come out. And so how cool is that?
Yeah, I that's something I have no problem with, because it's not something he stuck right next to the sports almanac.
Like she hands him the plush doll first. How would you like this Roger Rabbit plush doll that came out in 1988 feature? It's like, all right.
This is like Alfred Hitchcock walking by a storefront window in Psycho. Like, it's just subtle enough to where it's not bothersome.
So that was pretty cool. I missed all the callbacks and everything.
Right. I mean, even Spielberg in Jaws 19, I mean, I'm sure he doesn't care.
And I think for the hologram, the special effects guy, when he first saw it, and the director, they were okay with it looking kind of fake, like really fake, because I think at the time they had special effects to clean it up a little bit to make it look not so bluey and cartoonish. But he said he loved it. He loved the distortion. He loved how cheesy it looked.
Right,
so they
and
kept it like that.
It still looks cheesy, but it's part of the charm of the film.
Yes, it does the job for the 19.
But we see that level of special effects, and then we see the other special effects in the film.
The car flying and everything.
Yeah,
which it blows your mind that this was made in 89, or they were making this in 88.
Yeah, the floating DeLorean is some of the best special effects in the film. Also, how they created those composite shots. They created the VistaGlide motion control camera system, so that really allowed them to incorporate the camera movements into the shot. Now, the composite shots have been around in films for years, but this was the first time where the camera was really able to move within the scenery and really not make it seem like, oh, the actors are just sitting side by side and it's pretty obvious that way. But no, they're interacting with each other. I think the best use of it in the film is when the two Doc Browns are communicating with each other. You have, the 2015 Doc handing 1955 Doc tools around the lamppost. So it was neat to watch.
It was. I love those scenes, especially with Biff talking to Biff in the car. It's just fun seeing that technique used, and how they were able to do it so flawlessly, and it didn't look hokey.
No one does it anymore.
No,
it's just easier to computer graphic people now.
Well, in Moon they utilized it with Sam Rockwell fighting himself, which was your lens flare, but nevertheless,
well, it just didn't make sense that they've known each other for 20 minutes and they're already beating the crap out of each other.
But that's a good usage of it too. So kudos to them for, once again, in a Back to the Future film, progressing special effects and really breaking new ground, driving cinema in of itself.
Yeah, I did love that line at the end, like, well, just land on top of him, crush his car. Like, he's in a 46 Ford, we're in a DeLorean, he'll run through us like tinfoil.
There is so many catchy lines in this film. They fleshed out Strickland? Slacker, you got an attitude problem, Tannen.
I always wanted more Strickland in all of the films.
Always. He's so great.
Plus, the actor is so great.
Yes.
He was the we probably mentioned this in the first episode, but he was the admiral in Top Gun who was always like, "You're a loose cannon, Maverick." He's great.
He is.
If you needed like some hard ass authority figure in a mid to late '80s film, you called James Tolkien.
He'll point a shotgun at you, chase you down the street.
I love that scene. Marty shows up on the porch like, so you're the one who's been stealing my newspaper.
Eat lead, slackers.
That is such an inappropriate response to someone stealing your newspaper. Right. I mean, that's on the same level as like putting a firecracker in the newspaper. You're like, that'll teach him.
It's perfect. His character, I'm so glad they fleshed him out a little bit in this film. So kudos. That's a highlight of the movie. See?
The fleshing out of several characters while leaving others unconscious or unmentioned.
Right. Their love for 1955.
Well, even when they go back in 1955, even the characters of George and Lorraine are left unexplored.
Yeah.
The exact everything that's happening to them in the first film is happening here. There's no change there.
I was sad that we didn't get to see a little bit more of Lorraine. I really like her character and the actress that plays her.
Leah Thompson's great. I mean,
she's so good.
I just watched the original Red Dawn the other night. Not for the first time, but just like, you know what? It's in my Netflix. Let's watch it. Yeah. It's still, I mean, it kind of holds up. Granted, it's a lot of right-wing fantasy now, but it's still a fun movie to watch.
What is it about the Nazis attacking?
No, it's when the Soviets invade Western United States.
Oh yeah, that's
and a bunch of high schoolers kind of band together to fight the invaders.
That's right wing fantasy.
Oh, just watch it. You'll get what I mean.
Those Soviet or socialists will take them out.
Well, and I think one of the strengths of this film, more so than the first one, and it really explores the consequences of time travel.
Okay.
If anything, this is a anti-time travel film, where the first film was, pro time travel. See, it can change your life. It changes your parents' life, and you open the garage door and you have a Jeep. And then this is anti-time travel because we see the consequences of Marty buying the sports almanac, it winding up in Biff's hands, and totally changing the town and his family. He comes back to Biff 1985, and his father's dead.
Been murdered by the man.
Right, murdered by Biff.
Right. 2 McFlys with the same gun.
Yeah, and again, Doc admonished him for buying the almanac, and granted, I think that was a poor decision to just throw it in the garbage and then leave the time machine unattended. And do you mean to tell me there isn't any sort of like locking mechanism on the time machine or any type of fingerprint scanner to make sure, like, hey, the person who's supposed to be driving this thing actually is driving this thing?
Well, maybe maybe Doc wasn't that attuned to the locking mechanism. He seems like a moral and ethical guy, very hopeful. And
I did like this idea of exploring one timeline versus multiple timelines.
Yes, that was a good part of the film. I love when you get them back in the lab and they're like drawing on the chalkboard. They skewed us to this Biff timeline.
Right. Mm-hmm. And this is something I hope that other time travel films do incorporate at some point. I mean, it still remains to be seen what the MCU does, but again, we can hope. But I think it is a very interesting aspect when you are discussing time travel of going from one timeline to another.
Mm-hmm. Well, they set it up in a very simplistic way, and they set the rules like we enjoy. They explain the paradox, which a lot of time travel films don't talk about the paradoxes ever. So I think that's why these films work so well, particularly this one with changing the past and going back. Whereas many time travel films, like, 12 Monkeys that we've discussed, just doesn't make sense. Even Looper, where it's like, we need more. Tell us the rules of time travel. And right. It makes sense. Not like this.
Well, we haven't done a time travel film in a while.
I know. This is our first in quite some time.
Quite some time. Well, we had like 10 or 12 of them in the first 30 episodes.
Right. Then Sweet after Sweet. And then Cloning after Cloning.
Right.
In between a French baguette film.
Wait.
Mr. Baguette. So I'm glad we got this. But the paradox, I think, served as, at least to me, a good conflict in the film.
Yeah,
nice.
It's still very much a Back to the Future film.
Mm-hmm.
We still get all the same gags, same characters, just done in a different way, I guess.
Yeah. It's a good, I don't know. I think with sequels, how do you feel about this with sequels? Is it a good blueprint for how sequels should be done? Or do you think this was the first sequel that kind of like let down? Outside of like Jaws or something.
Well, this is inevitable with any sort of franchise, especially when you have a film like the first in this series that set the bar super high. Anything that's going to come after it is going to inevitably be a letdown in some way. It's like with the James Bond series. It's like going from Skyfall to Spectre.
Mm-hmm.
Of course, it's tough to follow that up.
I mean, not many series have done that. Like, what? I've never seen Godfather 2, but I've heard it's amazing and it beats the first one. I've heard,
it's like 1A and 1B. I will never say Godfather Part 2 is above Godfather, but I think it's on the same level.
All right, that's cool.
Yeah.
Yeah, all right, then Godfather 3.
Doo-doo stew. Massive doo-doo stew.
But we can't always get Empire Strikes Back.
No.
That's so tough.
Well, and it's so hard to duplicate the magic that made the first film so good. If anything, I think this is a blueprint of how not to make a sequel. You don't expand the universe. You don't introduce new characters. You don't reinforce the rules set forth from the first film. It's when you go back to the events of the first film and literally replay those out, you're basically just doing part 2 of the first film.
Like Hangover 2.
Right.
Where it's the same
You're doing
film.
the exact same thing.
Just different circumstances.
So, with all of that in mind, let's discuss the legacy of Back to the Future Part 2.
Okay.
So, take this for what you will. It holds a 65% rating on Rotten Tomatoes, as well as a 57% rating on Metacritic.
Yeah.
I think the Metacritic's a tad harsh.
I do too. I couldn't believe it gave it that low. Even the Rotten Tomatoes 65. I'm like, really? This isn't that bad.
No.
Considering. But, take those for what you will. Metacritic always seems to be pretty harsh.
It's user-edited reviews on the internet. We all know how safe the internet is.
Yes. And then IMDb gives it a 7.8. So, I think it's somewhere in the middle.
Right. I would call this, if we're using the IMDb scale, I'd call it like a 6.75.
All right. Holla.
Well, and it released in 1989, which is a banner year for films. It was the third highest grossing film of the year behind Indiana Jones and the Last Crusade and Tim Burton's Batman, which are both are unfortunately not sci-fi films, so they will not be on our list.
Unless we change the rules one of these days.
We're not going to, though. It was nominated for an Academy Award for Best Visual Effects, and it did win the Saturn Award for the same category.
And it made a bunch of money on VHS.
Yes.
When they released it. Because I know I watched the crap out of these films when I was a kid. Loved them.
Oddly enough, this series was not one that my dad had purchased.
Really?
Yeah, so I didn't come to this series maybe until I was about 15.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's so late.
I know.
No way.
I'm not upset at my parents for not buying this. I mean, because my dad always enjoys watching the first film. I thought for sure we would have at least had the first one in our household, but no. It was always just like Terminator and Predator on repeat in my house, pretty much.
Oh, okay. Yeah. So he's like one of those dads.
Yeah.
Oh, that's fair.
So I can sit down with him and watch a rated R film, but The Simpsons was something that's like, whoa, no, turn off The Simpsons.
We can't see cartoons talking
right.
crazy.
Well, I think Universal was also disappointed with the gross of Part 2, as it only made $336 million.
Yeah.
Wasn't nearly as much as the first film grossed.
Yeah.
But again, it's the same problem with a starter film that is so beloved.
Exactly.
Anything else is going to be a letdown.
Exactly. It's few far between ever surpassed. So I think it still did darn good for its budget and for what it's worth.
Well, what didn't help was the fact that Part 3 came out 6 months after this film came out. There was no time to build excitement and anticipation.
No. And it was just so quick. And then you get the trailer at the end. I wish they would have waited, because we saw that with The Matrix, that series where they released back-to-back after 6 months apart. And we saw it with Star Wars, 2018, Last
It's
Jedi
fatigue.
and Solo. People just don't want to see films that close. We want to get it on our DVD, Blu-ray, watch, Give us some time to digest it.
Yeah, it's fatigue. It's audience fatigue. You see it all the time. It's why hardly anybody makes sitcoms anymore. It's why you don't release films within this films within the same series in the same calendar year. You don't do it.
Give us some time,
right?
Studios.
Follow the Avengers way. Have Infinity War one year and Endgame the next year. That's how you do it.
Exactly. Speaking of fatigue, did you have any red shirts in this film?
No one dies.
No.
Except George.
Yeah.
And his death is essential to the plot of the Biff 1985 timeline. So no one dies.
No one dies. There's really no yellow shirts either.
No, there's nobody who I would consider like a hero. I mean, maybe Doc when he swoops in with the DeLorean to catch Marty when he jumps off the casino roof.
You're so good, Doc. Woo!
Woo! You caught me. Thank God for the flying DeLorean.
I enjoyed the guy that was like, I think he took his wallet.
Yeah, just parroting the action of the film.
Yes.
I think he took his wallet. We get it.
We get it. You think he took his
even
wallet.
in 1955, no one's like, dude, shut up. We saw it.
So with that, what would you rate this film, Chris, with our scale of would watch or wouldn't watch, would watch, would own, and would host a viewing party?
I'm going to give this the same rating I gave the first Back to the Future. I'm going to call this a would host a viewing party.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I think while no film is going to be able to capture the same feeling as the first film, this is still fun to watch in its own right. The 2015 sequence is particularly enjoyable. It does offer something new that I think every sequel needs to include, but most of the film is still essentially the same as the first, and Part 2 does a great job, like we mentioned, of exploring the consequences of time travel. And it is mostly fantasy in the film. Those consequences are something to consider if time travel does become a reality. And I think subsequent entertainment entries in this franchise, like the television cartoon, the Telltale Games video game that came out several years ago, I think those do a good job of exploring timelines and concepts that could have been used in this film. So it's not from a lack of plot lines in Part 2. We do get those ideas in subsequent Back to the Future property. So I love the first one. I love this film. So I'd host a viewing party anytime. What about you, Sean?
You couldn't have said it any better. Or I couldn't have said it any better. I'd host a viewing party as well. Love the characters. It's so great to come back to them and watch them. Good story, good fleshy, meaty divulgent of them. I love fleshing them out and seeing Doc and Marty and Biff and all that. And it's just, that's probably one of my favorite scenes, Doc talking to himself, the older and younger version in 1955. So I would love to host a viewing party for this. I would host a viewing party for all three to sit down and watch them because it's just, it's a great series.
8-hour party.
Ooh!
All right. Auga.
I love the series, love everything about it. So it's got my vote for sure. So
awesome. Well, then that means we get to throw in Part 3 into the list, and maybe in another year or so we'll come back to the Back to the Future series. So what do you say we pick our movie for next time?
Let's do it.
So we're going to enlist the help of our friendly random number generator AI, Major Samantha, to help us select from a list of 118 films. And from that list, she has selected number 51. It is a film in the Marvel Cinematic Universe from 2015, directed by Peyton Reed and starring Paul Rudd. It is Ant-Man.
Sweet.
All right.
I'm stoked.
So that'll be our film for next time. And before we sign off today, recently I had a chance to meet with one of our listeners and friend by the name of Katie. So we just want to give a shout out to her. She is going through a tough time lately. Just wants you to know that we are thinking of you and we are hoping you are doing better. And if you enjoyed today's episode, please head on over to Apple Podcasts and leave us a 5-star review. It really helps to drive us up the charts as well as help people like you find the show. We are across the spectrum of social media with Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram, all at ForceFed Sci-Fi. You can check out and download episodes from Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Spotify, the iHeartRadio app, or wherever you find podcasts. And go ahead and hit that subscribe button so you never miss an episode. Finally, you can check out our website, forcefedsci-fi.com, for show notes and links to all of our social media. So for all of us at the ForceFed Sci-Fi team, we'll see you next time. ForceFed Sci-Fi is written and hosted by Sean Culp and Chris Rupp. Website design, associate producer, and editing by Jeremy Keski. Artwork designed by Mike Berger. Theme music composed and performed by Custom Anthem.